Welcome and thanks for joining this special webinar hosted by ECG with our vendor and technology provider partners, Mutare, Neustar, Redshift, Transnexus, TrueCNAM, and YouMail. So we're glad to have you here. ECG is an engineering company based on voice network engineering and data center and ISP engineering. We do work on the front end for development of proof of concept, prototyping, and RFI type work to help you develop and choose the right technology. And that's why I'm so glad to have these high-end vendor partners here with us today to talk about their technology options so that you guys have great options to choose from. Then we work on the configuration and deployment. We think about the issues beyond just kind of the narrow scope of any one project out to the rest of the network and how that product rolls out. So that's integration, remediation with the vendors, working on integration questions as they come up. We work on acceptance testing, prioritization, so bringing this out, rolling this out to your operations side. That can involve compliance, that can involve cybersecurity implications, and work with a product development team. And then we do training and operations to be sure that you know how to operate and do an excellent job of supporting these. So as you roll out this kind of service, everybody in your organization will be well equipped to do it. So our technology partners are joining us today from a lot of different companies. I'll introduce my friends here today. So from Mutare, we have Rich Quattrochi. He's Vice President of Digital Transformation at Mutare. He holds 6 patents, and he's working on his 7th patent for the work done here at Mutare. So welcome, Rich.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
From Neustar, we've got Bart Petavento. He's the Director of Product Marketing at Neustar and responsible for driving the go-to-market strategy for Neustar's trusted call solutions and order management portfolios. Welcome, Bart.
Thanks, Mark.
From Redshift Networks, we've got Ray Muscatel. He's the Vice President of Worldwide Sales. He leads the sales teams and is responsible for sales marketing for Redshift Networks UCTM product portfolio. Welcome, Ray. Thanks for joining.
Good morning. Thank you, Mark.
From Transnexus, Alex Finichel is a software engineer and leads the design and operations of Transnexus's cloud-based service platform, ClearIP. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
From TrueCNAM, Greg Bloomstein is the founder of TrueCNAM and the TrueSpam service. Welcome.
Thanks for having us today, Mark.
And from YouMail, we've got Gary Christensen. He's responsible for leading new business development and strategic relationships at YouMail. Glad to have you here, Gary.
Thank you, Mark.
The first distinction I want to make is the difference between the robocall mitigation and shake and stir. So you've probably heard a lot about shake and stir and robocall mitigation versus spam calling. So really the FCC has been focused on eliminating illegal robocalls. That's really been the focus. So that's why the image here at the top here is a focus on, you've got, this is actually a photo that was later determined to be of an illegal call center operating out of India, making illegal calls to the United States. And so outbound robocall mitigation is about preventing those calls from going into a service provider network or an enterprise PBX and going out to the world if those are illegal. Whereas that's not really our focus today. Our focus today is what customers are actually largely interested in, which is on not getting annoying calls. And so here we've got on the other side, this is the call coming from the voice service provider network down to your customer, represented by the gentleman at the bottom. So that's really our focus today, is what you can do to protect your customers against those annoying spam robocalls. So the interesting thing is that inbound wireline robocall mitigation or spam calling is truly an enduring problem. So in the last few years, you've seen a lot of the wireless providers, especially in the US, beginning to block spam calls. There's a few major tech providers that are really focused on wireless blocking. But the interesting fact is that according to a study by TNS, the wireline situation is actually worse. As much as 37% of calls to wireline phones are unwanted versus only 17% of calls to wireless customers being unwanted. So the wireless customers, the wireless operators were kind of first movers here, but the wireline carriers have a real opportunity to excel because of the number of unwanted spam and undesirable calls that are going into these networks. So there's a couple of big categories that are worth thinking about here. One is the analytics and the other is policing. So analytics is kind of a broad term, and these are done, I should emphasize, by the service provider or the PBX operator. So these are done as the terminating provider, or the terminating entity, you have the ability to control how these calls are done. So that's what these technology providers are able to provide for you, parts or complete solutions or elements that can be combined to allow you to do these major components. So one piece of it is scoring the call or analytics. And that scoring is determining how likely is this call to be unwanted. So they use, you'll see a variety of different technologies used across the industry, real-time databases with ongoing calling campaigns. So, for example, I got a calling number today. It was probably the first time that number had ever been called, and it was a spam call that came in. And so the tech provider there actually had a database. They were building it and used that to determine that that was a spam number. Then there's shake and stir data that can also be contributing. There's only a little bit of that in the network. Very few calls are actually signed as a proportion of total global calls. Alec and some of the other providers here, service providers and operators here have some data on exactly how that what proportion of traffic is actually signed with a shake and stir identity header. And then there's other innovations like voice captcha is a really notable one. I think our friends at Mutare have talked about the voice captcha as a way of basically asking the calling party to identify themselves. We also see, from the Metaswitch Microsoft solution, we see Privacy Defender, which has a related technology, different approaches. But basically, it's other innovations that allow you to make some good guess or some good insight, AI-based or otherwise, on whether this call is likely to be unwanted. And then once you've determined that, and you've determined how likely the call is to be unwanted, then you've got a threshold here. And if it's more likely to be unwanted than not, then you do policing. What do you do with those unwanted calls? So some options that really come up a lot are block the call, just don't handle it at all, refuse the call, give it a 3-tone, or reroute the call to voicemail, to a voice captcha perhaps, or label the call. For example, changing the caller name to spam likely. That would be some things you could do. Now, it's interesting, there's a lot of discussion about potential for revenue generation in this space. I'll give you 2 examples of that. So on the Verizon, on the mobile side, consumer focused, they have what they call Call Filter Plus. They currently charge $2.99. It gives you call filtering, but it gives you some additional features beyond just the basic and most elemental feature of trying to detect whether this is a spam call and then blocking it. It gives you some other controls. It gives you other visibility. It lets you change other settings. On the Vonage side, which is a classic unified communication as a service provider, an enterprise hosted PBX, they're providing at the very same price per user what they call Spam Shield. It's an add-on feature, and you can add that in. Now, you need to talk to your attorney about any sort of concerns here. There is an FCC prohibition against a per user line item charge for the other side, for robocall mitigation on the outbound side. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a service that protects the inbound caller against those calls. So you'll want to understand the distinction between those two, and you can see how Verizon and Vonage are examples of service providers who worked through that and made that decision to offer this as a service. So there is some revenue potential here that gives you some pricing power that lets you set different premium levels of the service that you're offering to be able to provide something compelling. So what do customers want? So if you're going to charge them, if you're going to offer a service, roll it out, it's important to know what they're looking for. So I did 2 informal surveys, and it's interesting, I got different results. So on one survey that I did a couple of months ago, that's shown here on the right, basically I said, knowing that we're not always going to be able to detect perfectly whether this is a robocall, what would you like to do with those robocalls? And so the majority in that case, you can see here, they said block all potential robocalls. You can see the wording that I used here. And on the left, I did another survey in the past week, and I asked the question a little bit differently, and I gave some different options: either block the call, label the call as like spam likely, or reroute the call. And you can see that the blocking the call here got a minority percentage. So somewhere close to around half of the percentage that wanted to block them in my previous survey. So we get a lot more interest in labeling the calls with something like spam likely in the more recent survey with different wording. So there's some space here to decide what's best for customers. There's some space to determine what customers are actually looking for in your environment, and whether some of these nuances, and I intentionally ask these questions in different ways to try to tease out some of these distinctions to see if we would get a result like this, and in fact we got basically opposite results from that. And in this example on my more recent survey, I gave these 3 options where we could block the call, meaning refusing to handle it, versus sending to voicemail. And it's interesting to note that a majority of those who want to block or reroute, actually they would prefer to not even send this call to voicemail if they had the option, if such a thing were possible. So those are some interesting results from potential end users. Now, as you're integrating that, and that's what I do, I try to think about the whole network and how this rolls out to your entire product. A few things to bring up. So one is the concept of a spam mailbox, and you're familiar with this, the spam or promotions mailbox from email. Well, customers are accustomed to being able to have a place where those unwanted spam emails go to, and they can be checked later. Well, there's probably a similar concept for spam calls. Customers are probably going to want to see which calls were missed, and so that may argue for sending those calls to voicemail, or potentially in some services a portal that lets you see those calls that were rejected. Maybe have them put on the missed call list in some way as a way of showing that those calls were rejected. Emergency 911 callback is another thing. There's potential for some regulatory interesting questions here. Of course, operators cannot block outbound calls to emergency providers, but we've got callback calls. So in the United States, the public service answering point would return a call to someone who calls 911 if they're not able to determine all the details of the situation, or if the call gets disconnected, they'll try to call them back. And so you want to be sure that your system is able to allow those return calls so that you're not blocking that as a potential spam call. There's robocall completion questions that should come up. You should be thinking about these, especially if you have a user population. Your users are considered rural by the FCC definitions. You want to be sure that you're complying with those rural call completion rules. I don't know of any reason that you cannot block calls as a user requested feature in those scenarios. And there's a lot of discussion about this, and the FCC is really encouraging different technologies for protecting customers against spam calls. So I think these things probably do marry up well, but you do want to talk to your regulatory attorney about that. And then you've got this other question of the FCC's concept of reasonable analytics. Now, this is mostly on the outbound robocalling side, those calls going from your network out to the rest of the world, and they expect you to apply reasonable analytics, they say in the FCC regulations, for determining how you're going to decide to block those calls. Obviously, we're talking about the other side of it, but probably I would expect that similar concepts are going to be discussed, and you're going to be expected to explain how your analytics work. And so in that case, you would work with your vendor to be able to discuss it and explain it in your robocall mitigation database filings and things like that. So next, we're going to bring in our panelists here and talk about our options. We're going to start with Rich Quattrochi from Mutare. So welcome, Rich. We'll have a time for questions at the end of this webinar, but welcome, Rich. Glad to have you here with us.
Good morning, Mark. It's good to be here. Looking forward to today's session and being with such distinguished panelists. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and normally what I do, I take about 45 minutes. I have 5 today, so I won't kill you guys with PowerPoints here, but you should be able to see my screen right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take you through a little bit about who we are. Mutare, it's the Latin word for change. We've been around for about 30 years. We specialize in enterprise solutions. So I'm going to be talking about how to stop unwanted calls coming into the enterprise. And you really have 2 types. Mark did a pretty good job framing the problem up. You have those annoying calls that are coming through that people know are spam, upsets everybody in the contact center or front desk, whatever. They wind up hanging up on those. Some people fall for them. But then you also have malicious calls, vishing calls that take place where the caller is trying to steal money from the organization. We work on stopping all of those. We've been doing this for 30 years. We have about 2,000 customers, over 2 million licenses under management, and we pride ourselves on the support that we give. When you look at stopping these unwanted calls, there's really 3 impacts to the enterprise. One is we're going to improve your voice network performance, because the way our system works is we're going to stop the call before it rings in. We're looking actually at the SIP invitation, and we make a decision whether to route the call, drop it, or to allow it through to the endpoint before it rings in. We'll send a signal back to the carrier to drop the call. If there were a person on the other end, they would get a busy signal or a carrier recording. We reduce your cyber risk profile, if you will. Think of improving your resistance strength. Everybody has firewalls that protects their email. They also have other systems to protect the data that they have within their organization. Virtually no organization has any type of protection on their phone system. The easiest thing to hack in an organization, in an enterprise, is the human being. And the front door is wide open when it comes to the telephone system. So if you could put something in front of the phone system at the SBC level and stop those calls from coming in, those malicious calls, you wind up improving your cyber risk profile. And then last but not least, you're going to improve team productivity. And this is very important because we're seeing anywhere between 10 and 20% of the calls that come into the enterprise are unwanted. Now, Mark mentioned a statistic of 37%. What we are seeing is what the customers are telling us are the unwanted calls they want to block or route. And sometimes it depends on, some things are seasonal. We've seen spam rates as high as 40% in certain organizations, especially in hospitals and universities. So it can dramatically impact the productivity of the individuals that are working there. Our job with our spam filter is to stop spoof calls, robocalls, vishing, any type of spam calls. And we work with every technology that's out there. Currently today, we're working with the SIP invitation. By the end of this year, we'll have a robust API endpoint that the carriers can call where they can offer this to their customers through a set of APIs as well as SIP invitation. So both will work. So I'm just going to give you the quick highlights here. I'm going to show one screen here. This is our spam filter dashboard. This gives an administrator the ability to see everything that the system has done in one screenshot. You'll see the number of calls that were wanted, that were unwanted, calls that might have gone to CAPTCHA that we weren't sure about, what those CAPTCHA results were. You'll also see the top wanted and unwanted calls. And then everything that you see here on the screen, you can drill down. So you can actually take a look at every single SIP invitation that came into your organization, into your network. And this will enable you to refine your rules. We have a number of different tools, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but it's really important to understand that we are not listening in to your calls. We're making all the decisions based on the SIP signaling information. We're looking at things such as the telephone numbers, their shaken scores, et cetera. And we make a decision in about 300 milliseconds, whether to drop the call, route it someplace else, or to pass that through to the endpoint. And the important part here, and Mark talked about this, we put the enterprise in complete control. So as a carrier, you don't have to decide whether you're going to block the call. You don't want to necessarily have your boat leave the safe harbor. This is the easiest way to do things because the customer, the end user, if you will, is ultimately in control of what happens and whether they're going to accept that call or not. The tools that we use are pretty straightforward. We have a rules manager that allows administrators to go ahead and create, allow and block calls. We have a personal block list. As an administrator, you can decide which users you want to enable them to block their own calls. You typically wouldn't give this to somebody in a contact center, but you're definitely going to want it for your team and your C-suite. We have a dynamic list that we use to check against numbers. Today, we're using Nomo Robo. We are actually adding other dynamic lists to this as well. We have a spam storm detector. If you take a look at the way many of these contact centers are working, they're just going to go ahead and choose a area code and NNX and just hit every single telephone number in sequence. As they go down the line, we pick up those patterns, we see them, we stop them, we'll go ahead and send those calls to CAPTCHA or just drop them. We're also able to integrate stir shaken scores if they're being passed through to us, so we can detect a single phone call that, for example, is a spoofed call. Our overall philosophy is to do no harm. So we've implemented a voice CAPTCHA. If we suspect a call is a robocall, we'll go ahead and send it to the voice CAPTCHA, perform a reverse Turing test. We stop the bots and we let the humans get through. Again, there's 3 actions: will allow, drop, or route the call. This can be deployed on premise behind the firewall. It can be deployed in any cloud. We have our own very secure cloud, and it can also be deployed as a hybrid managed service. We have a free voice traffic analysis that will do for you. We can look at your CDR records. And while we can't pick up certain things on CDR, we can tell you what your robocall problem is. And I think that's the fastest I've ever done this. So Mark, back to you.
Great job, Rich. Yeah, thanks very much. So next we're going to go to Bart with Neustar, Bart Pesavento. Thanks for joining us, Bart. It's all yours.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody. My name is Bart Pesavento. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Neustar. And today we're going to be talking about our Trusted Call Solutions portfolio. So real quick, we just want to hit a couple of the market drivers that are going on here today. So there's the regulatory mandates. The FCC has created these mandates that the carriers need to implement robocall mitigation as they're shaken technologies. And these really represent a cost center for the carriers today. And from a calling experience perspective, most enterprise calls, 88% of them go unanswered today. And these new technologies have had the unintended consequence of a lot of these calls receiving unfavorable call treatment, meaning they're not ever getting to the recipient because they're either getting caught up in an analytics engine or they're not receiving the proper attestation. So the things the enterprise and the consumers want is they ultimately don't want to receive any of these robocalls on the inbound side, and they want to make sure that their calls get through. So from a carrier perspective, they're looking for monetization opportunities. I worked for a carrier for a long time, and it's a tough market, right? You're always looking for ways to generate new revenue. And from these mandates are really just created more costs for the carrier. So they're looking for ways, how do I turn this into a monetization opportunity? And ultimately, what everyone's looking for is how to restore trust in the phone channel. So let's talk here first about our Stir Shaken solution, right? Stir Shaken, I think everyone's familiar with that. Our version of that is called Certified Caller, and we also have something called a Certificate Manager. Certified Call allows you to authenticate the call and also to verify a call. Certificate Manager is really where you get your certificate, that's your credential, so you can sign calls. So we have both of those services. And this service allows you to be compliant with the Stir Shaken mandate. And we built a service that works for both carriers and enterprises. So carriers can sign, and we've also built a service that allows enterprises to sign because many enterprises want to take control of this themselves. So we've enabled enterprises to be able to do that as well. What does this ultimately do? On the originating side, or the outbound side, you're signing calls. Everyone on the other side of the ecosystem can trust that your calls are signed. It's very important that your subscriber calls are getting through. On the inbound side, well, you want to make sure that you can verify that same call that somebody else signed with Stir Shaken. And then also you want to see look at that Stir Shaken passport, and there's additional signal in there that you can include in your algorithm. So one thing I wanted to, the amount of increase we've seen in just signed calls since May is really 20x. So this is really ramped up. Nothing motivates people like a mandate. So that really has caused a huge increase in the amount of Stir Shaken traffic we've seen. So let's talk about our robocall analytics platform here for a second. So again, there's two sides here. There's the terminating inbound side, meaning these are calls coming to your subscribers. We have a proprietary algorithm. We assign fraud scores to these different phone calls, and it allows the carrier to be able to determine what they're going to do with that call. How do they want to treat it? On the originating side, or an outbound call, we also have a service. And this is, part of this was driven by the FCC mandate that you have to have a solution that allows you to not generate robocalls. So we also have another capability here, which is reporting. So if you think about this, in order to be able to identify things that look abnormal, you need to know what normal looks like. So that's what our reporting capability really does here. So this leverages our existing infrastructure for caller name. So we're able to deliver those warnings to customers via that, to the device via that same channel. And it's easy to implement regardless of the hardware that you're using because it's, again, using that same infrastructure. And we have a flexible policy engine. This allows operators to customize the display message, so you can put in there whatever you want based on the rules that you've established. So if you look at the overall Trusted Call Solutions platform, these are the three things that we just talked about down here. And overriding all this is something we call a policy manager. And what the policy manager allows you to do is to personalize the policies and preferences at these different hierarchies, meaning I can do it. A carrier could apply at the network level that I only want anything that's above an 80 score for a robocall, I want to put an alert on. An enterprise might not have that same rule. So we have the ability to assign that's the same sorts of rules and policies in a hierarchical level. You can also do that at the subscriber level. The other thing I wanted to point out here is that this policy manager is what enables that to happen, and it spans the entire portfolio. If you look at one other thing I wanted to point out here, I talked about some of these caller name optimization when calls are getting blocked or they're getting improper treatment. One of the things we built is something they call caller name optimization, which allows those calls to be vetted, those numbers to be vetted, and therefore those calls to go through. And out-of-station elevation ensures that if there's a lot of different complex enterprise applications where they're not receiving the proper out-of-station today, we have a way to support that. So just to kind of recap, Neustar, we offer a full portfolio of carrier and enterprise services. We've got extensive relationships with over 800 carriers and 7,000 brands. So we work with both sides. We understand the needs of both the enterprise side and the carriers. And we're co-authors of the STIR standard and a contributor to the Shaken framework. So we've been doing this for a long time, and we've been part of the body making those actual decisions. And we run what's known as the ATIS test bed. So this enables carriers, equipment manufacturers, and enterprises to come together to test their solutions. So recently, we just expanded that from just doing the vanilla STIR Shaken to including international, rich call data, and out of band. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you. Here's our contact information, and turn it back over to you, Mark.
Great. Thanks very much, Bart. Nice job there. Ray Muscatel from Redshift, you're up. Welcome.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Yes, Redshift Networks, we focus on VoIP cybersecurity. Just real quickly, we're located in San Ramon. We've been developing the software for several years. Some stats on deployments that we have and the number of active sessions that we're supporting. Just at an architectural view, our software is kind of divided into three different areas. One is security, where we identify anything coming into the network, try to stop any threats at the edge of the network. Fraud detection, monitoring any threats that are inside of your network. And also we have the analytics, which correlates all this information for surveillance of the network, troubleshooting, and real-time mitigation. We also have a SIP intelligence network where we collect the attack data from systems around the world, no customer data, just attack data, and we triage that and push it out to our installed base. So very much like you might have Symantec software or Norton Utility software pushing in malware updates. We do the same thing, except we do it for all the different type of VoIP threats that are hitting networks around the world. The problem that we're really addressing is that we see that operators need new tools to understand what's happening in the voice network. So when we talk with folks, we find out that they understand and they can see with the tools they have about 10% of the threats, the toll fraud and TDOS and some robocalls and things like that. What we want to do is enable our customers to have the additional visibility. We can identify over 40,000 different type of SIP vectors. And today we're talking about spoofed calls like number harvesting and nuisance calls and spam calls and all of these different calls. So what we want to do is we want to give our customers the visibility to see what's happening in the network and then proactively take action. Some of the main features we have is we have geolocation, so we can display a map of where your network's being attacked. Everything we do is in real time. We have auto mitigation. Everything is threshold controlled. So you are in control of where you want to set the boundaries in the network, so you can actually control your risk. We have near zero false negative and false positive because of the algorithms we have, the patented algorithms that we use to monitor the calls. We have the network visibility, where we tell you who, what, when, where, and how your network is being attacked, and also the intelligence for the deep packet inspection, performance monitoring, all the different troubleshooting and reports that you would need. We can identify spoofed calls. We can do auto mitigation, and we also, as mentioned earlier, we support the Stir Shaken initiative. We have a robocall database of over 3 million robocalls. We're probably adding about 30,000 a day. So just some of the normal use cases that customers would use our software for, and we see different types of fraud, spoofed calls, Wangiri calls, robocalls, nuisance calls, all the different type of attacks that you would expect in a normal voice network. So talk specifically about how we stop spam and robocalls. We use, as I mentioned, a multi-sourced global database. We use multiple algorithms to detect the calls, the illegal calls. We can identify where they're coming from using our geolocation. And of course, we capture the rich data about the illegal call with our deep packet inspection. We have a feature called Advanced Fraud Interdiction. And this is where we have a communication link with the SBC, where we can block the illegal call in real time. We are vendor agnostic. We work with any SBC vendor out there. And as I mentioned, we also support a Stir Shaken initiative for verification and attestation. Talk a little bit more about some of the frauds, threats and attack. We can do auto mitigation for botnets, registration storms, and things like that. These are all types of security attacks. We use standard XML APIs. We can do updates to the router or the SBC. We can publish alerts to GigaView Fabric Manager with Gigamon equipment, and also support Cisco PX Grid for quarantining the IP addresses. We sit in the data center, so our software would run on the server with a direct connection into the SBC. So we do a port mirror image. We can monitor all that traffic with a mitigation server. As I mentioned, we can send ACL updates to the router and the soft switch. So we would sit in your data centers monitoring the traffic coming through the SBC. For fraud, we can do auto mitigation for PBX hacking, traffic pumping, things like that. Again, this is standard XML APIs, and this is triggers based on volume and duration-based thresholds. We send an update to the dial plan of the soft switch. And then auto mitigation, as I mentioned earlier, for spam, robocalls, TDOS, band numbers, and things like that. We use the advanced fraud interdiction, where we have a communication link between our UCTM system and the SBC, where we can tell the SBC to either block or allow that call. So that's kind of a high-level overview. Mark, I usually go through this in about half an hour, but I hope that gives you enough information for today.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks very much, Ray. That was super. Appreciate the network details there. So next we've got Alec Finishell from Transnexus. Welcome, Alec.
Yes, thank you for having me. Let's see. Is that screen share working?
It sure is.
Perfect. So hello, my name is Alec Finishell. I'm a senior software architect at Transnexus. For those who don't know, here's a quick background about Transnexus. Transnexus has been developing software for the telecommunications industry since 1997 for both large enterprises as well as primarily service providers. And that the software solutions that we offer really are a wide range of services, from jurisdictional least cost routing, CDR mediation rating, robocall mitigation, toll fraud, robocall prevention and mitigation, and then of course Stir Shaken analytics reporting, as well as some more. So a fairly wide range of services and available in our platforms. But of course, today we're kind of focusing on the inbound robocall prevention features. And really, our robocall prevention is all based around a policy and reporting engine. And the policy engine is what allows you to control the behavior really on a per subscriber basis. What we see often is, and I think what Mark showed in his stats, what subscribers want really varies. When a hospital gets a robocall, they generally don't want those calls to be blocked. They might want to be marked as spam, update the CNAM so that they can deprioritize them, but they'll generally want to receive them. Where we hear from, consumers, individual, lines specifically, or enterprises that don't do a lot of telephone sales, typically like, I don't want to get that call just to have you tell me it's spam. I'm not going to answer it. Just block it or route it straight to voicemail. So having the flexibility to, on a per subscriber basis, set that behavior, I think is something that really makes every subscriber get the best experience. They get what they want. And a lot of our service provider customers have web portals that their subscribers can log in and manage their account. And some of them have added support for the subscriber to make these policy decisions, and it just makes API requests to our policy engine on the back end. So I think that policy engine is really a critical aspect for getting the best subscriber experience. And then of course, the reporting is really critical for this. When you block a call or route it to voicemail, you need some way to identify, how well is this working? Do I need to make any adjustments? So you need to, look back what percentage of calls were blocked, false positives, look at per subscriber information, and really be able to quickly and efficiently sort and filter that data. So that reporting engine is very important as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the way our robocall detection works, because it's probably a little bit different than most. So it's really a set of tools that are used, and we really present each of the outcomes of those various tools to you and allow you to make a lot of decisions. It's not really a black box where it's just some score and we're telling you, well, it's a robocall or it might be a robocall. We really present the reasoning behind it and allow you to make a little bit more of a decision yourself. And where those sources come from, first thing is shaken verification. If that call had a shaken identity header in band or out of band, then we can verify that, and then we can let's say, okay, this is coming from this service provider. Every shaken passport is signed by the service provider's shaken certificate, which has their OCN in it, and so we can track percentage of robocalls coming from each originating service provider, and then take action based on that. Detect invalid numbers, and not just US invalid numbers, but of course ITU numbering plans is really what drives that. So it works worldwide. And unallocated numbers. So being able to identify numbers that haven't been allocated to any service provider. I'll receive a fair number of robocalls that end up, I think, accidentally coming from unallocated numbers. And then we also integrate with some third parties for do not originate number databases, as well as calling number reputation. So you can bring your own data providers, and that data can be fed into the system that really the policy engine that you're using to make those decisions gives you the control over. And specifically, just to look at some of the data providers that we had. So some of the data that's being used for inbound calls, one of the first things is the LERG. That's how we know who owns these numbers, and so we provide that primarily. But then NPAC, you need to know when a number has been ported. If the calling number has been ported to another carrier, but then it's signed with a different carrier's certificate, that could have some indication in whether or not it's a robocall. So you can bring your own NPAC. We can, of course, supply that. Do not originate number databases. So these are databases of numbers that are just straight do not originate. We maintain a database, and I know Somos has one as well that we integrate with for 8YY. Reputation providers. I think we've got some of them on this call today. So these provide reputation scores. We can use that data to take action. That the policy engine allows you to use that. And of course, CNAM. This is kind of the inverse of this when it's not a robocall and you want to take some action. Having some CNAM data that can be displayed to a user is of course important. I want to look at what the integration would look like a little bit. So the way our integration works, our platform is available both in the cloud and on premises, and the integration is done via just standard SIP signaling. It's all at the SIP level. Of course, it works with TDM equipment with a SIP, TDM to SIP gateway, but it really works with any SBC. We've got a number of SBC and switch vendor partners that we have partnered with, but we have yet to come across a single switcher SBC in 20-something years that we haven't been able to integrate with. So it's a fairly switch and a network agnostic setup. But I do want to show kind of what an example deployment would look like. And of course, again, this is just an example. There are other ways that it's done. It's not always done at the ingress SBC as an example, but when a call comes in, it starts coming from the carrier, and generally service providers would have an ingress SBC. it would hit that SBC. We typically deploy the application there where that SBC sends that call up to the reporting engine. And that reporting engine has all this data, LRG, NPAC, DNO, reputation, and CNAM. Some of that data may have been, pre-downloaded. For example, the LRG and NPAC, that data exists, in the policy engine itself. It's downloaded in advance of the call. But then other data like CNAM is queried in real time. So it varies based on the data and also the provider. Some different providers do it different way. And based on, the analysis that's done, a decision is made, and the subscriber that it's destined to, a decision is made to take some action. And that may be to allow the call or to divert it. And then that will result in a SIP 302 being returned that can be used to, say the destination is the switch, the destination is the voicemail server, the destination is a capture gateway, whatever that destination should be. And then of course, a SIP 603 can be used to block that call, and that 603 would get sent back to the carrier. Of course, this is all, customizable. This is just an example, but that's what a typical deployment would look like. So that's kind of a quick rundown of what the Transnexus policy and reporting engine looks like. If there's any questions, I've got some contact information here that feel free to contact us with.
Great, thanks very much, Alec. I appreciate that. And again, I'm a fan of network diagrams, so very helpful there. Next, we've got Greg Bloomstein from TrueCNAM. Greg, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me. You all see the slides there?
Looks good.
Thanks again for having me today. I'm going to try to power through this really fast because we don't have a lot of time. So a little bit of background on us. We were founded in 2014 to address the growing robocalling problem. And what we really offer is TrueSpam scores, a real-time caller reputation analytics database, which we soft launched in 2015. Our first carrier customers came on board in January of 2016, and we're used today by ILEX, CLEX, VoIP providers, and enterprise customers. The service is available via an HTTPS REST API and other licensing terms. And contrary to our company name, our focus has really been our TrueSpam score since late 2015. We were the first reputation database to be integrated into a major SBC platform with Metaswitch back in 2016. And we're also integrated into Transnexus's ClearIP and NextOSS, which Alec just introduced, since 2018. So what is a TrueSpam score? It indicates the likelihood that a call is an unwanted call, including obviously telemarketers and robocallers. And we provide back a score from 0 to 100, which indicates the likelihood of an unwanted call. And we provide defined ranges for low, medium, high, which some of our customers use for different purposes in terms of diverting or blocking calls. Our scores are created by leveraging data from multiple data sources, and we sort of look at it like a FICO credit score. The more data and sources, the better, and we weigh different aspects of the score in different ways, or different sources in different ways. Scores are updated in real time based on incoming data, and TNs that are no longer generating negative data are aged out of the system automatically using a time to live mechanism. The entire system is real time. It detects new robocalling platform or campaigns frequently within seconds to minutes of the campaign beginning. So what are our data sources? This sort of shows graphically where our data comes from. I'm going to get into some of these in the next slide. So first and foremost, live traffic flows, the volume and velocity of calls. How many calls is a specific number generating, at what speed? We also look at signaling data for the call, stir shaken data, and other data related to the call signaling. In-network captchas, these are captchas deployed in network with carrier partners where you're presented a captcha, press some number to complete your call. We receive real-time data on that, indicating the success or failure of a captcha. We also have what we believe to be one of the largest honeypot networks with 500,000 honeypots. These are telephone numbers that are not in service with subscribers across multiple carrier partners in the US and Canada. We receive real-time data on those calls, indicating the calling information, signaling data, and some data. We also intercept in some cases calls where we record the call and analyze the audio from the call. We started out using historical data. So we had 10 plus years of carrier partner CDR data to analyze and create our algorithms. We still have access to that data, which we use to enhance our algorithms and also back test changes that we make to our algorithms. We also use end user feedback and white and blacklists, which are essentially end user opinion indicating if a call is spam or not spam. That's very useful information. The problem with it, it's often delayed by minutes to hours after the fact, in which case some campaigns have already ended. We also use government data, federal, state, and local from federal, state, and local agencies. Some of that data is public, some is private, and we also use other proprietary methods. So these are a few of our disclosable customers. Many of our customers are under NDA, we can't disclose. The big ones are obviously Twilio, Metaswitch, and Transnexus, which was on the call. Just touching on a few customer highlights, Metaswitch has 500 plus carrier customers in North America. Our service is provided as a turnkey software as a service to existing ILX, like and VoIP customers. Literally just click a few buttons inside the switch and it turned on. We started discussions with them in fourth quarter of 2015. First deployment started in third quarter of 2016, and their customers range from small to Fortune 100 ILX. Movius, I wanted to point out because they're an enterprise customer. They provide a white label solution called Multiline. It's an app for iPhone and Android devices on T-Mobile, formerly Sprint's network. And it's designed to replace enterprise office desk phones with a managed smartphone app. So get the physical desk phones out of the office. And our TrueSpam scores are used in network on T-Mobile's wireless network. We obviously had to go through some vetting because of that. And Movius's customers and investors include primarily large banks such as JP Morgan Chase. There was also some vetting related to that due to the financial industry regulations. Another customer I always like to point out because they're sort of amusing is Jolly Roger Telephone Company. They've received significant press attention because of what they do. They provide bots that actually waste the time of a telemarketer, and they use our reputation scores to determine when to intercept a call, answer it, and have their bots talk to a telemarketer. They've been featured in places like New York Times and on Shark Tank. Another issue I'd like to touch on is data retention. We're abnormal in the fact that we actually throw away the vast majority of the data received. And the reason we do that is for subscriber privacy. When we designed our system, we didn't want to store anything that resembles a CDR. That's to both for subscriber privacy as well as to avoid subpoenas and what are known as no such letters. Carriers are very comfortable with what we're doing and with our data and how we're retaining data. And another reason for this is obviously all of these companies that have had data leak issues over the last few years. And we think that there's sort of a question about whether some of our competitors are in the robocall identification business or the consumer data business. We know nothing about consumer data business. We are not our specialty. We come from a telecom background. Additional TrueSpam details. We currently track greater than 2 million North American TNs. The numbers are obviously always growing, even as old numbers are aged out. Numbers are automatically TTL'd in anywhere from hours to days to, in some cases, weeks. Our false positive rate is less than 0.01% over the last 6 months. And we offer basically a simple REST HTTPS API. It's delivered via the cloud. We can also, in theory, do on-premise. We've done 1 or 2 deployments there. It's not our primary method. Our response latency average for returning a score is 35 milliseconds. We also offer a low latency API, which is 5 milliseconds for specific use cases. We operate a high availability database cluster in AWS and systems in 2 geographic regions and 6 AZs. We'd have to lose all 6 AZs for the system to go down. And we've had 100% uptime since December of 2015. We also license data to greater than 1/3 of the STIR/SHAKEN approved certificate authorities. And we license data to competitors to augment gaps in their own caller reputation data. Normally, I'd have about 15 minutes to go through that and some other things, but that's all the time we have today. Thanks again to everybody, and hand it back to you, Mark.
Great job, Greg. Thanks for that. Hopefully we'll have a minute or two for some questions at the end. So, and last we have Jerry Christensen from YouMail. Welcome, Jerry.
Hello, everybody. All right, let's go ahead and share. All right. So YouMail. We started off in 2007 as a visual voicemail company, and we still offer that as an over-the-top app. And we realized a few years ago that because we receive all of the robocalls that every other network receives, that we have some really valuable data. So consequently, we have, there's a couple of illustrative enterprise customers that I'll list here for now, Marriott and Voxox, but we have several others. And what we do is we offer data as a service. And I'm going to get into how we do that, why we do that, and what the solution looks like. So again, because we offer a visual voicemail service that's on a cross-carrier basis, we've got a very large footprint. And this enables us from a statistical perspective to see enough of these robocalls quickly enough that we capture all of them from the perspective of the unwanted robocall campaign audio. And by that, I mean they reuse the same audio over and over again. And I'm going to discuss in just a minute how we track that. But because we detect this on a cross-carrier basis, we can very rapidly identify when a campaign has occurred and then track that across a whole bunch of different telephone numbers. And that's really important because I'm sure many of you have heard of the snowshoe tactic, where instead of taking a single telephone number and placing 100,000 calls, they might get 10,000 numbers and place 10 calls, which is very difficult to track unless you can identify what's going on. So the way we do this is we run AI and machine learning on the audio that's left behind. And again, we have millions of users, so we've got a lot of these audio messages to evaluate. The very first thing that we identify is whether or not it is a robocall. And then the next thing that we determine is whether it's a wanted robocall or whether it's an unwanted robocall. Because there are some wanted robocalls, such as from public safety or perhaps some commercial robocall that you might get from a bank or something like that. So from a PII perspective, we don't look at any of the private messages, and we also segment the unwanted robocalls. And what we do is we curate them, we templatize them and label them and create a digital fingerprint. And again, that's really important because we can use that to track those particular calls across whatever telephone number they happen to hit. We do this in real time. And what we do is we capture not only the audio, but we create a transcription. And we make that transcription available to our customers that want to know if any of their numbers have been hit. And if so, what exactly is hitting that number. And I've got an illustrative example here. We do this much faster and much more accurately than event-based analytics. We refer to what we do as content-based analytics because we're looking at the actual payload, the audio left behind in the voicemail, as opposed to event-based. Event-based are some of the things that we actually talked about earlier in this webinar. So that would be SIP messages or maybe real-time CDRs or answer seizure rates or hold times. Those are indicative of what's happening, but not necessarily conclusive. And so we can say that we have virtually a 0 false positive rate, and similarly, virtually a 0 false negative rate, because again, we've got the actual audio. Now, of course, we provide scoring, and it's up to the terminating carrier to determine what they want to do with that, whether they want to block, label, redirect. So there could be some error there in terms of interpretation. And one of the examples I like to give is the car warranty scam. Some people think that's fraud and perhaps blockable. Others think that it's obviously a nuisance and unwanted, so they might label it or redirect it. But again, that's up to the terminating carrier to determine what they want to do. So here's just a visualization of what we do with audio fingerprinting. So as a human being, you can kind of look at these waveforms and see when one looks like another one. So like you might look at B and see 10,000 of the same looking waveform and see that you've got a match. And some of them are really, really close match and the others are not so close. But as a computer, a machine can do this very rapidly. It's highly scalable. And so the reason why this is important is because when we have a call come through, we can match it to a fingerprint immediately and know exactly what unwanted call campaign it's associated with, and then provide a score accordingly. And here's just a few examples. from our database. And again, we curate them, we label them, we attach a name to them like the vehicle warranty scam. We also have the actual transcription associated with each one of these. An important point to make here is not only is our data used, and I'm going to get into a minute how it is used on the terminating side for carriers to decide what they want to do with the calls, but also this data is used for mitigation purposes. We are the preferred vendor from the US Telecom's ITG group, the industry traceback group. And what we do is we provide evidential proof of the wrongdoing, along with all the data necessary to perform a traceback. And we've been successful in stopping these bad actors and their campaigns, actually having them removed from the networks. So here's how we integrate to be able to stop the spam calls. What we do is simply provide our data, and it can be either on a query response basis, which of course has some minimal latency, or we can provide as a push on a periodic basis to VoIP infrastructure, such as a soft switch or a session border controller. We can push, as I mentioned, on a periodic basis. It could be every hour, it could be every 5 minutes. And the way this works is we just send our entire database. And what this does is it functions to update the routing tables in the SBC so that it knows when it sees an incoming call, should I let it go through as normal? Should I redirect it? Should I label it or block it? And so I'm saving some time for Q&A. For more information about YouMail, I would encourage you to reach out to us. And thank you very much, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. Good work. I appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone, all of our vendor panelists for being able to make time for a little discussion. Feel free to turn on your cameras here if you'd like to. And as we discuss a question that came in, we've got a few here. First question, Alec from Transnexus mentioned that the 603 decline was returned in some cases to the carrier. The question is, do they find that sending the global 603 decline to the carrier is not honored? The questioner, Roger, mentioned that they found that the carrier sometimes just send another SIP invite back into the enterprise network due to having multiple routes into the enterprise. Is that something that you have any comments on, Alec?
We certainly used to see that more. It's a lot less common. I think most service providers have supported 603, proper implementation. It is a global decline code. But in the event that that doesn't happen, we almost always find that it is the service provider, the hop right before you, that is not honoring the 603 by converting it to something else. So then a downstream provider, or I guess really it's an upstream provider to that service provider, it resends it because they didn't get a 603, they got something else. So generally, if you reach out to the carrier that you sent the 603 to and say, why did I get this call again? They'll find that they are not sending back a 603, they're converting it. And once that's corrected, it does resolve that problem. I know one customer had some difficulty where the service provider couldn't do that. And so what we actually had is we made some changes so that it actually answers the call with a 200 and then immediately sends a buy. So that can be resolved, but I think there's only ever had to do that once with hundreds of deployments.
Interesting. Thanks for that. Yeah, good question, Roger. So another question, a couple of you mentioned the latency that was involved. So one of you guys mentioned the typical latency to go through the entire process might be 300 milliseconds. Another one of you mentioned latencies down in the 5 to 35 millisecond latency. Any comments from the team about what kind of latency really matters here? I mean, is 300 milliseconds on the hairy edge, or are we really thinking more like 1,000 milliseconds as being a true limit where service provider enterprise would start to be concerned about the implementation? What's a good latency and what's a bad latency? What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, obviously it's going to affect PDD. We've had carriers ask us to get it as low as possible, just because carriers are always very sensitive to PDD in any way, shape, or form. I don't think in enterprise it's really quite as important. In the hundreds of milliseconds seems certainly reasonable to me.
We found for the enterprise 900 milliseconds at the outside works just fine. For a carrier, you would want it much lower, obviously.
Gotcha.
In my experience, I think you have to be a little bit careful when you look at a single component. You really have to look at it all. What are you doing for that call? Are you doing a CNAM dip? Are you doing reputation analysis? Are you doing any other analysis? What's the total latency? Because if you try and get one service down from 40 milliseconds to 30, it looks like, oh, that's a 25% decrease, but then you've got another service that's taken 2 seconds. You didn't really change much. So I think you have to kind of be careful and look at the total PDD and not each individual service, because that's what matters. It doesn't matter what the individual service is.
It's like if you're trying to buy parts for your bicycle to buy the gram scale, but you really could stand to lose 30 pounds. Sometimes you could put the effort in the wrong place.
Exactly. It's very easy to do that.
One final question. A couple of you mentioned the admin portals that are available, so that your enterprise users or administrators are able to have some visibility into the policies. You have thoughts on kind of what are the key components of those kind of portals that has really been a valuable thing that you've seen customers really get a lot of value out of? Allowing the end user or the end user administrators to log in and view settings, what's the most valuable part for them?
Yeah, so this is Jerry. I'll go ahead and speak up for ours. One of the things that we've heard is most valuable is visualizations. They want to be able to see, is my network clean? Is it not completely clean? And if so, where? And one of the things that they found that's really useful for us, and this may be just unique to YouMail, I don't know, is the transcription and the actual audio of any issues on their DIDs. So in other words, if their DIDs are spoofed, or if there's any audio on there that the engines have found problematic, that we can actually display that to them. And that's really helpful from a redress perspective as well. So that's one of the things that we've gotten as feedback.
Yeah, from our perspective, I think one of the things we've heard is having something that you can assign at a hierarchical level, at the network, enterprise, and down to the subscriber level, and then across span the entire portfolio, I think are some important things that we've been hearing from the marketplace as well.
Okay. Other thoughts on useful components, that really the key things for the admin portals for viewing these settings?
One thing
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one thing. I know we had one customer that that deployed an application for robocall blocking, and they primarily were doing this with call blocking, and they were charging some customers for it. And then they had some customers reach out to them and say, I'm not sure if this service is really working or not. And it kind of occurred to them that presenting the information about what was blocked was really quite important. And then the customer looked at it and said, oh wow, this is blocking a lot of calls. Yeah, this is certainly worth it. So if you're going to sell this as a service to your enterprise, you need to be able to show them how effectively it's working, or it's hard to sell.
Gary, you get the last word.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, and it's funny that Alec mentioned that too, because I was going to say that visibility into block calls is going to be increasingly important, especially with the new FCC order that's going to be taking effect, where there's going to be a need to be able to report when calls are blocked. So it's not something we're seeing right now, but it's something that we're hearing is going to be certainly useful.
Interesting. Good. Well, thanks to all of you for joining. You're all doing really good work. Lots of great technology presented here today. I'm going to encourage you who are watching this webinar to download the slides online. You'll get an email about how to download those slides. Reach out to these vendors, set up additional conversations with these gentlemen and their teams to see how these products can be integrated into your network. Of course, feel free to contact us. I'm Mark Lindsey. I'm a senior member of technical staff here at ECG. And I'd be glad to chat about any of these things or work with you on a project. So thanks very much for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.